The skies over Siberia stretched cold and gray, heavy with the kind of silence that comes before something massive. The first sign of the anomaly was nothing more than a flicker, a brief glitch in the sky, like the air itself had stuttered. Then it happened. The ground trembled beneath the feet of every solitary traveler and animal, as though the earth had sighed in disbelief. A ship, impossibly sleek and luminous, descended into the world. The air shimmered with distortion around its hull, as though reality itself hesitated to accept its presence. It wasn't the kind of thing Earth was used to seeing, not even in their wildest dreams. It hovered over the snow, 30 meters off the ground, its shape shifting in and out of focus, as if it was more idea than substance. At first, no one moved. Then the phone cameras flashed. 1,000 different angles captured it, shared instantly across the globe. Russia's military response was swift, but so were the people, already posting the footage online, tagging it with their best guesses. A meteor, an experimental drone, a prank. No one could explain it. And the ship, in turn, offered no explanation. It was just there, hovering. Within moments, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the sky, the whirring blades cutting through the air. Armored vehicles rumbled across the snow, the tires leaving deep grooves behind them. Soldiers, their faces tense, formed a loose perimeter around the site, all their weapons aimed upward, waiting for something they didn't understand to give them a reason to act. Then the cloaking malfunctioned. A high-pitched hum tore through the air, like 1,000 bees swarming in unison, and the distortion vanished. What remained was impossible to ignore. A ship that shimmered like liquid glass, its surface reflecting the wintry landscape, yet somehow out of place, not quite belonging. Its metallic blue hull pulsed with an unnatural glow. From within the ship, a sound echoed, a series of sharp mechanical clicks. The air around the ship grew colder, as if it was drawing the warmth from the land itself. Then a figure appeared, standing at the open hatch. A tall being stepped onto the snow. Its shape was humanoid, but something in the proportions was wrong. Too long, too slender. Its skin, a shade of silver not seen on Earth, seemed to ripple with light, as if it were constantly shifting. A ripple of panic spread across the human crowd. Phones were now trained on the figure, live streams flooding the web, sharing the scene with billions of viewers. But the figure didn't move. It stood frozen, as if waiting for Earth to make the first move. Then, as if by some instinct, someone shouted from the crowd, "It's real." The words echoed in the stillness, and the alien's head turned slowly. Its eyes, black as night, glistened under the faint light of a distant sun. The world watched in a suspended moment of disbelief. Nothing else in the galaxy could have prepared humanity for what came next. The alien stood motionless, its black eyes scanning the crowd, its presence a silent weight that pressed down on the gathering below. It was as though the world had collectively held its breath. For a brief moment, nothing moved. No one spoke. The chaos that had swirled through the internet and news stations suddenly felt distant, as though the moment itself had become real, too real for comfort. Then Lexi Tran appeared, her boots crunching across the snow as she strode toward the alien ship. She was Earth's best, at least, that's what they kept telling her. The top negotiator, the one who knew how to talk to the untalkable, how to find the common thread between enemies. But as she approached the being, even she could feel the enormity of the moment settling into her chest like a heavy stone. This wasn't just an alien encounter. This was the breaking of every rule humanity had ever known. The military had their guns trained on the ship, the officers rigid and wide-eyed. Lexi ignored them. They were trying to play it safe, but there was no safety now. The cameras were still rolling. The world was watching, and the message they sent today would echo across the stars. "You're sure this is the one?" Lexi muttered to herself as she reached the base of the ship. She was talking about the alien standing before her, who now tilted its head, as if it could sense her presence. Ambassador Lexi Tran. A voice crackled from behind her. It was Colonel Dmitri, the head of the Russian military's Special Response Unit. He was tense, his voice unsteady. "Are you sure you want to do this? We could fire if we—" "No," she interrupted, her voice sharp, more for herself than for him. "We can't fire. This is not a military operation. This is—" She looked back at the alien, then up at the shimmering ship. "This is diplomacy, or it's nothing." The alien took a step forward, its long limbs moving with unnatural grace. It raised one hand slowly, fingers elongated, its touch gliding through the cold air like it was sensing the atmosphere itself. Then it spoke. The sound was not human. It was a series of soft hums and clicks, rhythmic and alien, like something from the depths of the ocean. But then, a device on the creature's chest pulsed with a soft blue light, and the words came through clear, in perfect English. "We come in peace." Lexi's heart skipped a beat. She'd read the reports, the protocols. But hearing the words directly, in such a calm, steady voice, it didn't make the situation any easier. The world, the nations, the history, everything was now on the line. She didn't hesitate. "We were not prepared for you," Lexi said, her voice steady despite the chaos bubbling just beneath the surface. "But now that you're here, we need to understand what you want." The alien paused, its eyes locked onto hers. The silence stretched between them, charged with the weight of centuries of unknowns. The world was waiting. The cameras were waiting. And Lexi knew that whatever came next, Earth would never be the same again. The alien's words hung in the air like a challenge. "We come in peace." A simple phrase, but in the context of the moment, it felt like a dangerous game of trust. Lexi Tran stood at the front of the crowd, every eye on her. The alien's black eyes glistened, unwavering, as if it could see straight through her. It had spoken their language, but it felt like it was speaking from a place far beyond their understanding. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every breath. Around her, soldiers shifted uneasily, their hands never leaving their weapons. In the distance, helicopters circled like buzzards, the whirling blades a constant reminder of the fragile control Earth's military still clung to. And above them all, the ship hovered, its gleaming hull reflecting the setting sun. Lexi took a step forward, her boots crunching against the cold snow. "You come in peace," she repeated, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. "But you've broken Protocol 7.13. You've entered Earth's atmosphere without clearance, without authorization." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. They had all heard of the Galactic Code, the interstellar regulations that governed peaceful contact between species. Protocol 7.13 was clear. Any species wishing to make contact with Earth was required to first request permission from the United Nations, followed by a series of rigorous checks and assessments. Lexi took a deep breath, fighting to keep the panic at bay. This wasn't just a diplomatic issue. This was a legal mess. The ship's appearance had violated galactic law, and now Earth was in the middle of an intergalactic crisis. She could see it in the eyes of the military personnel. They were all thinking the same thing. What happens now? The alien, if it noticed their unease, didn't show it. It tilted its head, its long, thin neck extending slightly as it seemed to process the information. Then, without warning, a series of mechanical sounds echoed from the ship, like a door opening or some kind of hatch releasing. The alien's chest glowed faintly, and for the briefest moment, Lexi thought it might be some kind of weapon, some kind of threat. Her hand instinctively hovered near her sidearm. But instead, a holographic screen flickered into life in front of the alien. The symbols that danced across it were incomprehensible, each one a jumble of lights and lines, completely foreign to Earth's known alphabet. Lexi's heart skipped. This wasn't just a ship. This was a communication device. Before she could speak again, the alien's voice cut through the tension, now softer, more calculated. "We did not know the protocol. We did not know the consequences of our actions. The world fell silent. "You didn't know." Lexi's voice was barely a whisper, her disbelief thick in the air. How could they have come all this way and not known such a critical rule? The ramifications were massive. If the Paxari, the species the alien belonged to, didn't know the protocol, what else had they missed? What else had they miscalculated? 1,000 questions crowded Lexi's mind, but there was no time to ask them all. The silence was broken by the sound of engines roaring in the distance. Military reinforcements were coming, too many to stop. Lexi turned back to the alien. "You need to leave," she said firmly, her voice quiet but filled with authority. Now, the alien's gaze softened, and for the first time, Lexi thought she saw something like regret in its eyes. But as the first military trucks rolled into sight, the ship, still hovering above them, didn't move. The days that followed felt like they belonged to another world. The alien ship, still parked in the middle of the frozen Siberian landscape, had become both the symbol and a prison. Earth's leaders, scrambling to salvage some kind of order from the chaos, had quickly decided the best course of action was to keep the Paxari, who still hadn't offered a name or any identifying title, under tight guard, but far from the public eye. And so, they'd moved them to Iceland, a hidden military base in the frozen north, far from the world's prying eyes, became Earth's first intergalactic detention center. Lexi Tran had insisted on staying, despite the strange looks from her superiors. She had been appointed Earth's official liaison, but more than that, she had a responsibility. The Paxari were here because of Earth's broken protocol, yes, but they were also the first alien species to make contact. And despite all the uncertainty, Lexi knew there was something to be gained from this, something important. She didn't know what that was yet, but she could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a curiosity, a need to understand this first step into a universe far wider than Earth had ever imagined. The Paxari were held in a sterile, white-walled complex deep within the vase, surrounded by armed guards and silent cameras. Their ship had been moved to a nearby hangar, its sleek surface covered in a thick layer of frost. The alien ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a puzzle, an enigma, a potential weapon, or a bridge to a future no one could yet comprehend. Inside their detention quarters, the Paxari did not act like prisoners. They wandered the space freely, their movements fluid and eerily graceful, never seeming to touch the walls or the floor unless they intended to. But their eyes, those eyes, always seemed to be watching, calculating. They watched the soldiers who passed by their door. They watched Lexi every time she entered. She was beginning to learn the intricacies of their behavior. They didn't speak often, but when they did, it was in short bursts. Their language was rhythmic, melodic in a way that suggested a complexity Lexi couldn't quite grasp. At first, their attempts to communicate with her had been simple, questions about Earth, about humanity. It was as if they couldn't fathom how such a violent, unpredictable species could have created so much of what they had, like a species that built its cities on conflict had somehow advanced further than they ever imagined. But there were moments when the silence between them was less uncomfortable and more intimate. In the strange, non-human way they communicated, it was like being trapped in a room with a creature who could read every thought in your head without ever saying a word. On the fourth night, as snow began to fall softly outside, Lexi was summoned to the Paxari's holding area again. She stepped into the room, where the same alien from before, tall, lithe, and impossibly still, was sitting, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "I understand," the alien spoke suddenly. The voice was different this time, softer, almost as if it was speaking to itself. Lexi raised an eyebrow, her heart picking up pace. Understand what? It met her gaze, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw something like guilt. The protocol. We did not intend to break it. Lexi nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't sure if she even believed the alien, but she wasn't sure it mattered. They were here now, and they weren't going anywhere. The wind howled through the icy cliffs of Iceland, carrying with it the scent of something that didn't belong. Inside the stark walls of the base, the tension had begun to thicken, like a fog rolling in. Lexi Tran stood at the edge of the operations room, her eyes fixed on the screen in front of her. It was a live feed from one of the satellite drones orbiting the base. There was a sudden flicker. Then the unmistakable silhouette of a ship, moving far too quickly for it to be friendly. "Colonel," Lexi said, her voice tight. "What's that?" Colonel Dmitri, his face pale, leaned over her shoulder. He didn't need to look long. His hand already hovered over the emergency channels, his eyes flashing with a mix of disbelief and worry. "Delcare," he muttered, the word cold in the air. Lexi's breath caught in her throat. She'd heard of the Delcare, a ruthless, shadowy faction that operated in the outer rim of the galaxy. They weren't known for diplomacy. They were known for making entire worlds disappear in the blink of an eye, for leaving nothing but smoldering ashes behind them. The Paxari had made enemies, and now, it seemed, Earth had inherited them. A red warning light flashed in the corner of the screen, accompanied by a series of cryptic beeps. Lexi's heart raced. The ship wasn't just flying in from deep space, it was locking onto their position. "Have they activated the lockdown sequence?" she demanded, her eyes darting between the growing map of the incoming Delcare ship and the list of available defenses. Dmitri cursed under his breath. "We've only got partial lockdown. We're still a few minutes from full isolation." "That's not good enough," Lexi said, snapping her fingers to a nearby technician. "Get me a secure line to the Paxari." The technician hesitated. "Ambassador, are you sure that's a good?" "Just do it," she ordered. The technician quickly complied, and the feed shifted to the Paxari's holding area. The alien, the same one who had first made contact, appeared on the screen. Its eyes, always so unreadable, now seemed unsettled. Something was wrong, something far deeper than the protocols they had broken. "What's happening?" Lexi asked, her voice tense. The alien paused, then responded, its voice low and controlled. "They are here for us. And you." Lexi felt a chill creep down her spine. The realization hit her like a gut punch. The Delcare weren't just after the Paxari. They were after Earth itself. The ship was a prelude to a far larger invasion. Before she could respond, an explosion rattled the walls of the base. It was distant at first, then closer, followed by the unmistakable sound of weapons fire. The base's security system had activated, locking down all exits. But Lexi could see it in the eyes of the soldiers running past. This was more than just a security breach. It was an all-out assault. "They're coming," the Paxari said, almost as if it had anticipated this moment. "And you won't be able to stop them without us." Lexi stared at the screen. The alien's words hung in the air like a challenge and a warning. The Delcare were no longer just a distant threat. They were here. With a sudden, gut-wrenching roar, another explosion erupted, shaking the building even harder. Lexi's hand tightened around the edge of the console. There was no more time for questions. "We're running out of options," she said, her voice steely with determination. "Prepare for a counteroffensive. We fight, or we lose everything." And as the first rounds of gunfire echoed through the halls of the base, Lexi knew one thing for sure. Earth was not ready for what was coming next. The rumble of artillery fire was deafening. Every few seconds, the ground trembled as if the Earth itself was protesting the oncoming storm. Lexi Tran stood at the heart of the operations room, her face pale but resolute. Around her, the chaos of the military response was in full force. Soldiers scrambled to their positions, weapons in hand, while techs worked frantically to keep their communication lines open. The base's walls had been reinforced, but the sound of impact against them told a different story, one of assault, not defense. In the distance, the dark shape of the Delcare ship loomed, still hovering above the icy landscape. Its sleek form blended with the shadows, almost indistinguishable from the night sky. but there was no mistaking the destruction it had brought with it. The base's outer defenses had been breached in less than an hour, and now the fight had moved inside. Lexi's stomach churned as she looked over the live feeds from the security cameras. The Delcair were methodical, almost surgical, in their approach. No weapons fire had been exchanged yet. They didn't need to shoot. Their ships had advanced far beyond Earth's technology. Instead, they had used electromagnetic pulses, disabling communications, frying anything that depended on electricity. The few remaining functioning cameras only showed figures in dark suits, moving swiftly, cutting through the corridors with ruthless precision. A call from Colonel Dmitri interrupted her thoughts. His voice crackled over the secure channel, but it was clear even through the distortion that he was on the edge. "Ambassador," he said, his voice tight. "They're everywhere. The entire facility is compromised. We can't hold them off much longer." Lexi's grip tightened around the edge of the console. Panic clawed at the back of her throat, but she forced it down. There was no time for fear. "What about the Paxari?" she demanded, her eyes flicking toward the secure holding area where the alien was supposed to be confined. "We're moving them," Dmitri replied. "But they're not going quietly. We think they've activated something in their ship, a defense mechanism of some kind." A cold shiver ran through Lexi. The Paxari had been too calm, too cryptic. Had they known this was coming? Had they known the Delcair were tracking them? Or was there more at play here than just a simple diplomatic blunder? Another explosion rocked the room, closer this time. The lights flickered, and alarms blared throughout the facility. Lexi's heart raced. She could hear the distant sounds of footsteps, guards running in a frantic attempt to defend their positions, but the noise was quickly swallowed by the deafening roar of another blast. She didn't have the luxury of waiting for reinforcements. The Delcair were already inside. They were moving fast, and if they got their hands on the Paxari, it would be over. "Get me to the holding area now," she barked at the nearest soldier, her eyes locked on the map of the facility as she pointed toward the elevator shaft. "And make sure we're not followed." The soldier nodded and ushered her toward the elevator, her mind already racing through 100 possible scenarios. The Paxari might be the key to turning the tide, but first, they had to survive the siege. As the elevator doors slid closed, Lexi knew the worst was yet to come. The battle had only just begun, and Earth was losing. The elevator descended deeper into the heart of the base, its metallic hum filling the silence that had settled over Lexi and the soldier at her side. She could feel the vibrations through the floor, a constant reminder of the chaos unfolding above them. The lights flickered again, casting long, eerie shadows along the walls as the elevator slowed to a stop. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. The hallway beyond was dark, the usual sterile white walls now bruised with the flickering glow of emergency lights. Dust hung in the air, a grim testament to the destruction that had already taken place. Lexi's hand instinctively went to her sidearm, her fingers brushing the cool metal. The soldier with her, a young man with nervous eyes, checked his weapon one more time before stepping into the corridor. "This way," Lexi muttered, her voice low but steady. She glanced down the hall. There was no sign of Delcair soldiers yet, but she knew they were out there, waiting, moving like shadows. They moved quickly, Lexi's boots silent against the cold floor. She kept her focus ahead, the pressure building with each step. The Paxari needed to be secured, and time was running out. As they turned the corner, they came to a dead stop. The holding area door was ajar, barely, but enough for Lexi to see that the room beyond had been breached. The usual containment field that had kept the Paxari secure was now glowing erratically, flickering in and out like a dying star. Inside the room, a figure stood, tall, impossibly calm, its black eyes fixed on her. The Paxari. It was waiting. "You're still here," Lexi said, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. The alien's long fingers moved in a slow, deliberate gesture, a series of complex motions that reminded Lexi of a kind of delicate choreography. It spoke again, its voice as serene as ever, but this time there was an urgency in the tone. "They are coming, but you don't need to fight them alone," it said. Lexi's heart skipped. "What do you mean? We're not." But the Paxari raised a hand, silencing her. "There is a weapon," it continued, the words slow and measured. "A device we can activate. But you must trust us. Trust that it will not harm your kind." Lexi felt her pulse quicken. A weapon. Earth had no idea what kind of power the Paxari might have at their disposal. But with the Delcare closing in, she knew they didn't have much of a choice. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward. "Do you have a way to stop them?" Lexi asked, her voice tight with the weight of the decision. She wasn't sure whether the Paxari's motives were entirely pure, but right now, they were their only hope. The alien nodded slowly. "The device requires a key. A living key." Lexi stared, her mind racing. "What does that mean?" The Paxari's gaze softened, and for the first time, Lexi felt an odd sense of empathy radiating from it, something more than the cold, calculated responses it had given before. "It means you must choose," the alien said. "One of you must join with it. Sacrifice yourself to activate it." The soldier beside her flinched, but Lexi stood still, every instinct screaming for answers. This was no longer about diplomacy. It was about survival. And the decision she made in the next few moments could determine the fate of Earth itself. Lexi's mind raced, her thoughts tumbling over each other as the weight of the decision settled on her shoulders. The Paxari's words echoed in her ears. "One of you must join with it. Sacrifice yourself to activate it." She glanced at the soldier beside her, his face pale and tense. But he didn't speak. No one did. They all understood. The alien wasn't just offering help, it was demanding a choice. The faint humming sound of approaching footsteps reverberated through the walls. The Delcare were getting closer. They were hunting, and they would not stop until they had what they wanted. Lexi could feel the pressure building, every second stretching into an eternity. The countdown was already ticking. "Lexi," the soldier beside her whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos that surrounded them. "You can't be serious. You can't mean." "I don't have a choice," she interrupted, her voice sharp but steady. "None of us do." The Paxari remained still, its black eyes watching them, almost serene despite the mounting danger. It didn't speak again, but Lexi felt the pull of its presence, like a magnetic force drawing her closer to the decision, to the unknown. "What happens if I don't?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. The Delcare would overrun the base, and the weapon, whatever it was, would remain out of reach. Earth's last line of defense would be gone. The Paxari tilted its head slightly, a motion that seemed almost sympathetic. "If you do not, they will win. Your world will fall. But if you choose, it will change everything." Lexi's heart pounded in her chest. Her hand gripped the sidearm at her belt, but it felt like a useless weight now. There was no fight left here, not the kind she was used to. This wasn't about holding a position, defending a base, or firing a weapon. This was about choosing to trust something she couldn't fully understand, something that might either save them all or destroy them. She turned her gaze to the soldier. His eyes were wide, filled with fear, but there was also something else there, something she hadn't seen before. Resolve. He was ready to follow her, to fight beside her. But this was her choice, and she knew what had to be done. Lexi took a step forward, her boots echoing softly in the quiet. The device the Paxari had mentioned gleamed in the low light, an object she hadn't noticed until now. It was small, almost innocuous looking, but she could feel its power pulsing beneath the surface. The soldier looked like he might say something, but Lexi raised a hand to stop him. "It has to be me," she said. "I'm the one they want. I'm the one who can." "No," the soldier said sharply, stepping forward as if to stop her. But Lexi held up her hand again, this time with more force. She had already made up her mind. A crackle of energy filled the air as she approached the device. She didn't know what it would do to her, what kind of sacrifice it would demand, but she knew there was no turning back. With one last, steadying breath, Lexi pressed her hand against the surface of the device. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then, everything changed. Energy surged through her, intense and foreign. For a brief moment, her mind went blank. She could hear the sounds of the Delcair closing in, but they seemed distant, muffled by the overwhelming force coursing through her veins. And then, with a final, resolute breath, she felt the ground beneath her shift. The war for Earth was no longer theirs to fight alone.